I'm Jonathan Meer from Texas A&M. Thank you all for being here. I think this is just incredibly interesting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the other presentations. So let me tell you just a little bit about myself. I teach a giant Principles of Microeconomics class. I have, I think, to be precise, 2,196 students this semester. It is asynchronous online. So it is obviously very different than the way a lot of y'all are teaching this. I use Achieve, of course, and we also have a packback forum. So one thing that sort of makes me worry a little bit less about AI use in this particular class is that more than half of my students' grades come from 3 in-person exams. And so if they do the Control-C, Control-V thing, they don't actually learn anything. And one of the things when I was setting this class up 8 years ago with my now retired colleague, Steve Wiggins, was that what Steve taught me through his long experience was, let's not set any rules we can't enforce. And since we couldn't enforce them copying off of their friends on their problem sets or quizzes, we said you're encouraged to learn from each other. And so, you know, that's called learning. It's great. I encourage them to work together, help each other out. And if they're using AI to just plug the question in, answer it out, they're not actually going to learn. And that shows up on the exams. You know, you can see the students who earn decent grades on the quizzes and problem sets and then bomb the exams. And I think that comes from, you know, 5 years ago it was coming from copying off of their friend, and now maybe it's coming from Control-C, Control-V. So I do worry a little bit less about this. I will talk a bit about the Packback Forum and how that's affected what we do. And the other class that I teach every other year. I teach an economics of education class, which is to 50 to 70 students in person, and that has both written assignments and a packback. And I'm going to talk about some of the ways that I've integrated AI into those things and sort of how my views on its use changed and evolved as I taught that class, most recently in the fall of 2023. So on November 28th, 2022, that was the day that GPT 3.5 was released. And I was, as the kids say, shook. I love technology. I think it's awesome. I don't think I've ever had an experience of being so terrified of technology. You know, I sort of drove around in a daze that day, and I wish I could remember who to attribute this to, but someone tweeted something like, "This must be what people felt like when they found out about the nuclear bomb." You know, you knew the world had changed forever, but you really didn't know how. So my first thought was that I'm going to be fine because my written assignments for my economics of education class are brilliant and unique and untouchable. My favorite assignment that my students do to read is the very last one. I say, if you could change one thing about the U.S. educational system, that sort of policy lever, what would it be and why? What's the best argument against your position? And just really work them through that. And it's completely open-ended. And I got home and I ran it through GPT 3.5 4 times, and it gave me 4 unique and interesting answers that with like 10 minutes of beefing up would have earned an A in my class. And so then I was like, okay, we can never do this again. As Justin said, you know, the idea of high stakes, asynchronous assignments, it's over. That's dead if you want to actually have that be a really meaningful assessment. And so then I said, okay, one of our instructional designers, this is like early January, amazing instructional designer named Shweta Kailani, who has unfortunately moved on from A&M, but she is one of the reasons I was able to do this giant class the way I've been able to do it. She says, hey, we're going to have a forum, a panel about teaching with AI and how to integrate GPT and how to think about it and how to prevent student cheating, and it's going to be great. Would you like to come? And I said, yes, absolutely. And then I found out that she expected me to be on the panel. That feeling when you look around for an adult to help you and you realize that you're the adult. So no one's coming to save us. We've got to figure this out on our own. I saw this a lot in the early going in my capacity as undergraduate director and sitting on this panel. I had faculty say to me, okay, what's our GPT policy? So I turned to the honor committee at A&M and I said, okay, what's our GPT policy? And they said, well, the honor code is written very clearly. You get to decide what constitutes academic dishonesty in your class. I said, great. So I went back to my colleagues who were waiting for instructions, and I said, you need to figure this out on your own. And it's going to be very context specific. You know, what works in my 2,200 student class or doesn't work is going to be very different than what works in a 200-person lecture or what works in a 25-person seminar. So these things are going to be highly context specific. There's no real playbook, and you're going to have to experiment with it, rethink the way that you're teaching in ways that, that may be kind of tricky. We're gonna have to walk ourselves through this. So you gotta take the leash yourself. No one is coming to save you with this. Okay, so how did I screw all this up? So in the early going, I said, well, you know, there's these AI detectors. There was that undergrad at Princeton who had GPT-0 or whatever it was, and everyone's like, okay, perfect. We're just going to plug this in, and it's going to be great. Of course, that did not work at all. So, you know, I certainly made some mistakes here. You know, in using PackBack built in AI detectors very early. It flagged some things, and you'd read it and you'd be like, this is very obviously written by like the early version of GPT, where, you know, it was always using like the same 3 transitions, right? And furthermore, this, and therefore this. I'm like, okay. So I made it low stakes at that point. I said, hey, I'm flagging this. Why don't you go rewrite it yourself? I did have one student who seemed to use it a lot. I said, I'm going to make an example of this guy. And we took it all the way to the Honor Council. By that point, I felt like he had been punished enough by going through this process. Regardless, I don't think he'd actually been using it by this point. He just wrote in a really stilted manner. And so I felt like doubly bad about bringing him in there. And in the end, I mean, I helped him with his defense despite the fact that I was on the prosecution. I said, why don't you take some of your earlier writings, pre-November 28th, 2022, run it through GPT-0 and show the Honor Council. And so he showed that his application essay to Texas A&M was coming back like 80% AI, despite the fact that it had been written in like 2020. So it was definitely not reliable. I felt really bad about it. I wrote him an apology. I actually wrote it. I didn't have GPT write it. And so, you know, that was definitely an early mistake, is thinking that these things were gonna save us. So, you know, even Judy Bloom couldn't tell that that certain things weren't written by a chatbot. And you can see this is a New York Times article from December 2022. So we're still talking GPT 3.5 here, right? This is the early version, couldn't search the internet. You know, the training data stopped a couple of years before, and it was still doing a pretty decent job in a lot of cases. Here's an example of a question in my PackBack forum for my principal's class. So it refers to an NPR Indicator podcast, really neat discussion with an astronaut on the International Space Station, talks about comparative advantage, barter, how scarcity of, say, fresh food as they're getting close to a resupply affects people's willingness to trade for those things. It's a really neat thing. And in many cases, the students really they really get their teeth into this one. It's really fun to read. So you cannot actually access GPT 3.5 anymore, at least not easily. So, but I asked GPT-4o, could you pretend to be 3.5? So I don't know if it actually did it, but it promised me that it could. And I asked for an answer to this thing. I just said, put this in here, okay? Now, if you read this, and you don't need to read the whole thing, you can see it's very stilted, right? So it says that this context allows for the realization of gains from trade. You know, it's showcasing comparative advantage in a microeconomic setting. So you look at this and you say, okay, maybe I could tell that this is GPT. So I went in there and I said, still is GPT 3.5, write this like you're a freshman at a big state school. And it comes back with this. So fresh food might be super valuable up there since it's so rare. It's hard for me to believe that someone could read this and be like, a real person definitely didn't write this. You know, it's so easy to have it produce something that genuinely looks like it was written by a person. And the only way you're going to catch them is if they're really dumb. Like if they copy paste the prompt into their question, which happened, right? Multiple times. Or in PackBack, the title of their response was something like, give me an answer to this question, and then they'd put in whatever it was. But you're only going to catch them if they're really dumb. So then I said, okay, let's go to 4.0. Now I can send it to the transcript and have it write another thing, and now it's got examples in there. I don't know that the language is that much better necessarily, but it certainly feels like this is someone who actually listened to the podcast, which so few of them do. It's 9 minutes. Listen to it at 1.5 speed while you're working out. But again, it shows sort of very natural language here, and it really does seem like it was written by someone who actually read this. Now, in the case of Packback, I don't think you're ever going to catch this. So why am I still using it? One is that I really think that the marginal cost of doing this for like a 4 or 5 sentence response is probably greater than the marginal benefit. Like, it actually took me a little while to get the prompt right, as Justin sort of walked us through. If you just copy paste this in, you're not necessarily going to get a great response. And so my hope, at least, is that enough students find this interesting, that they will actually go through and listen to the podcast, read the article, think about the idea, and actually respond. And just browsing through them. And again, based on the number of responses that I want from my students, I tend to get between 4,000 and 7,000 posts a week. So I do not read them all. Maybe I should have GPT summarize them for me. My TAs do kind of browse through, but for the most part, a lot of students really do seem to be engaged in this. And again, I'm not going to say, if you make it fun enough, they'll all do it. You're going to have that left tail that's going to slack no matter what you do. But hopefully by providing things that are sufficiently engaging and relatively low cost compared to going and doing it with GPT, they'll still engage with those things. Okay, so let me talk about the economics of education class, where I really said to myself, okay, I can't give them 4 policy memos to write anymore. They have to put themselves in the shoes of a senior advisor to a United States senator and say, how are you going to vote on this policy? Because that, again, is just, you can plug it in, especially if you give them an extensive rubric, and it will do a phenomenal job with any sort of open-ended response. When I asked my students about it, I was surprised at how few of them had used it for almost anything, because by that point we were 9-10 months into the GPT era, and probably 3/4 of my class told me that they hadn't used it at all. And, I asked them why, and they told me either they were afraid of being caught cheating, or and their other faculty had basically, their AI policy was nothing more than you're not allowed to do it. And so they were sort of scared. They're honest kids, good Texas kids, and they were afraid of being even accused of cheating by using these things at all. And others just said, I don't know how to use this thing, and it seems like it's for other stuff. I don't really know what to do with it. And they had very, very little experience with it. And my rule in this is, like, we're going on this adventure together. I'm going to hold you harmless from any mistakes I make. And so there were some writing prompts that just didn't work out that well. And I said, okay, like, I'm not going to ding you guys because I didn't write a good enough assessment for you. And also, you can use GPT for anything in this class as long as you tell me what you did, right? So some of them did use it for their Packback. They gave me their prompt, and they said, here's the prompt that I gave it. I said, well, you're going to be assessed on the quality of the response. So if you write a crappy prompt, you're going to get a bad grade. And you can't say, well, GPT told me to do it, any more than you could say, well, I copied off my friend, and it's his fault that I got this question wrong. So some people took a reasonable amount of advantage of it. Some people maybe went a little further than I would have wanted them to, but a lot of this was trial and error and trying to figure out how to properly calibrate where I wanted them to be on this. So I integrated AI into every assignment. Now, I still had in-class exams. I had originally thought, prior to teaching this class, the previous time I taught it was spring 22, and after that class I said, there's stuff I want them to know about the economics of education, but when are they ever going to have to sit down without any reference material and spit it out for me for 90 minutes? That's not really a realistic way of the world working. So I want them to know stuff, but I care more that they can synthesize these ideas. So I said, maybe I'll move to like 5 or 6 writing assignments instead of these in-class tests. Post-GPT, I went back to saying, okay, you got to prove to me that you know some of this stuff, and we're going to stick with that at least for this particular semester, and we'll see. I'm still not sure what I'll do the next time I teach it. Fortunately, I have a little bit of time. So I integrated AI into all the writing assignments, and I did this in a couple of ways. So one thing I had them do was evaluate the LLM's answers. Now, these are just snippets of the prompts that I gave them, and in many cases, I gave them a lot of instructions and a rubric that I generally had GPT write. I said, here's the assignment, And previously I might have had like a paragraph saying, here are the things that I care about. Here's how much weight I'm putting on, clarity of writing, stuff like that. And then I asked GPT to write me a full rubric. And I told my students, hey, if I'm telling you that you've got to tell me every time you use it, I'm going to tell you every time that I use it. And so it spelled it out there. So I think, again, the pop-ups are going to be at the end, so I'm going to go through these first. Also had them guide the LLM through evaluating other people's writing. So again, what you'll see is they've actually got to be engaged in this. They can't just say, well, the LLM said this, and so I'm moving on. And again, I'm going to show you the examples once I get through. And then finally, I thought this was super neat. Didn't always work out quite as well as I wanted to, but I had them debate the LLM. So previously, they would have written like a position paper on this, and I always asked them, what's the best argument against your position, which they generally do terribly on, because no one's ever asked them to reconsider their own positions on something. And so I would work that into every writing assignment, and they'd get better and better at it, because like the first assignment, they'd be like, well, some people would disagree with me, but they're dumb. Yeah, well, we're gonna steel man this a little bit more than they're just dumb. But in this case, you can debate the LLM. Now, one mistake I made here was, I thought I was so clever. So this was at the time when you could like send someone a prompt and they could pick it back, they could pick it up. I don't think you can do that anymore. Maybe it's back in 4.0, but I haven't looked at it since. So I could send them a prompt and I said, okay, it's gonna randomly assign you your position. Right? And so then as I'm going through these, I'm like, wow, these all seem, like 80% of these are all on one side of things. And so the next lecture, I said to the students, okay, remember, I'm holding you harmless, right? So no one's getting in trouble for this. How many of you had to take a position with which you disagreed? And like 3 hands out of 60 go up. I'm like, okay, well, that's statistically very improbable if this was randomly assigned. Okay, how many of you hit refresh until you got the position you wanted? And about half the hands in the room go up, which is what tells you, that gets you back sort of into balance. I'm like, okay, so next time I can't be clever and write the part in where the LLM is going to assign you your position. You're going to get assigned the position as a function of the last digit of your student ID or something like that. Right, so sometimes we can out clever ourselves, and I certainly did that time. The other thing that I did again was try to do my best, and again made a lot of mistakes along the way, setting really clear expectations around use. When is it allowed? When is it not allowed? Which things do I really expect you to use? I demand you use it for this, and where do I not want you to use it, or to use it? Actually, I shouldn't say not want you to use it, because it was fair game everywhere, but I want you to use it to help you edit and refine what you've written. Right? So just even more information for them than you might think is necessary is going to be really valuable. Okay, so here is one of the prompts. This is part of the very first assignment that I gave them, which I said, explain the difference between human capital and signaling along with the role of ability bias as if you were a middle school student. And then their job is to evaluate the quality of the LLM's response, which in general was not actually all that great. It was great at coming up with like superhero examples, but it would say things like, well, like signaling is like wearing a shirt that says you're really good at video games. And so the students would be like, ooh, this is great because it's talking about video games. I'm like, okay, is getting the shirt costly? How does getting the shirt separate the people who are good at video games from the people who aren't good at video games? And so getting them to think critically and not just take what the machine is telling them as given, I think was really important for having them see what the LLM's limitations were. What was it good at? What was it not good at? Here's another one. So this is a paper, and this again is the cruelty of getting old. The first time I taught this class, this was like a brand new article by Mike Greenstone and Adam Looney, and now of course the students are like, well, some of the things I don't like about this article is like this data is from like 13 years ago, so it must be wrong and stale. I'm like, that can't be right. 13 years ago? No, that's right. So part of this assignment was, the old assignment was you evaluate their assumptions and what is underlying this and what role might ability bias play in where's the best place to invest your money. Now I want you to get the LLM to interrogate the article, and then you tell me whether you think it's doing a good job. And so that was part of that. And again, with me playing around with this was a lot more work for me than copy pasting the previous assignment. But playing around with this showed me that actually the LLM was really bad at this part of actually interrogating the assumptions. Maybe the newest version, the 401, that is supposedly able to quasi-think, might be able to do this better, and maybe a future assignment might include compare how it does in the like thinker mode versus the less thinky mode. And then this assignment here, this was the debate on the College for All bill. It sort of prompts them about the College for All bill, gives them some more background, and then you know, I had it primed to say it was going to go back and forth. I got some really interesting feedback on this. Some students enjoyed it. Some students said it really seemed to get stuck. One student told me it was like debating his 15-year-old brother, just kept repeating the same point over and over again as if that was going to convince him. But again, shows you what. One of the lessons that they can take away from this is it shows you what it can and can't do, where it can and can't reason. So did they like it? We'll see how these things come up. So I survey my students separately from the 1 to 5 thing that the university does, and I did not get any like negative feedback on LLM use. Again, there's selection bias in who fills these out, but about half the class actually filled this out, and they really seemed to enjoy it. I thought this one was really interesting. This student telling me that it made the assignments easier, which seems like the opposite of what a professor would want. But we don't want to make it hard on them. We want them to learn, and I think that there is a lot to be said for helping them to learn not just the stuff that's in the textbook, but how to operate in real life and how to interact with these new tools that are out there. So here's what I know, and it ain't much. This is over. Like, there is no world where you can give a student an essay or have them do something at home that's high stakes and expect them to be able to, expect that to be a true assessment of what they're doing. I think even online exams, like I said, my exams are in person, which the university kind of gets mad at me because I have to come up with they have to come up with 2,200 seats for me 3 times a year. But one of the reasons that I don't want them to be able to do this is, again, because preventing Control-C, Control-V is really difficult if they're sitting in their own rooms. So you do have to trust them to some degree, right? They're not all angels, but they're not bad kids, most of them. Mine aren't, at least. And so keeping them looped in about why you're doing things, I think, is really important. And again, I wasn't happy to take the blame, but I was willing to take the blame when things didn't work out, and when a particular prompt just kind of fizzled out, especially as, of course, OpenAI was making adjustments to the model, and all of a sudden it wasn't interested in taking as strong stances on controversial issues for whatever reason. And so, if you want to debate it on teachers' unions, all of a sudden you don't get a debate, you just kind of get you make such excellent points. Here are some other excellent points that you might want to consider, and you just feel like, okay, can I prompt you to be like a little meaner? I don't know. But you've got to experiment. You've got to experiment with these things. What are the longer-run implications? I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, predictions are hard, especially about the future. But the upshot is, I think there's a big difference between the short-run path that we're on right now, where a lot of students are unsure how to use it, don't have a lot of experience with it, and maybe 5 or 10 years from now, where students are quite comfortable using it, where maybe it's going to be like, integrated into their classes or whatever, at which point, even in-class assignments might be over. But I also, what really concerns me, especially as the father of a 10 and a 13-year-old, is I think that AI can be really complementary to many of the things that we do, where we have the good ideas, we know how to structure a logical argument, we kind of know where we want to go, and this is going to take some of that burden of, filling in the sentences off of our plate. But if you never learn how to structure a logical argument, I don't know what you do the first time you actually have to do that yourself instead of relying on the calculator, right? So, I want to end on a note of optimism. I'm not quite sure how to get there from where I just was. I do think that with a lot of effort, I think that it's possible to integrate the LLMs even into larger classes in the ways that Justin was explaining, and certainly into smaller classes where I think students will really genuinely appreciate the effort that their instructors are putting in to think about this thing, because it's not going away. And like I said, this battle is over.